Hi everyone! Welcome back to House 17 and thanks for checking out today's video. Today's video is about talking to kids about racism. A lot of parents may worry or avoid conversations about racism, and others, especially the ones who are experiencing discrimination, don't have that choice. Either way, talking openly and honestly about systemic racism is important. And many families, even ones who are already having these conversations, can find themselves wondering, is it too much? Is it not enough? What if they're too young to hear this? What if we scare them? What if I'm feeling scared too? Well, in this video, I hope to share some ideas about how these conversations can go and answer some of those questions that people have. First, it's truly never too early to talk to your children about issues of race. Research continues to show that by just 3 months old, kids look differently at people who don't look like their primary caregivers. By 2, children are starting to develop and observe racial biases they see in the world around them. And by the time kids are 4 or 5, it's critical. White children are beginning to exhibit obvious racial bias, and children of color begin to feel and identify discrimination against them because of the color of their skin. At School 17, you're not alone in educating and supporting your children. The school is making effort on multiple fronts to ensure that kids are learning about the realities of racial injustice. And adults at the school are creating more an equitable environment and offering support through partnering with places like the Gandhi Institute. Despite this work at the school, there are some things that you can keep in mind within your own family. We want to set children of color up to combat internalized racial discrimination. And we want white kids to combat internalized racial superiority. Now, what do these terms really mean? Internalized racism happens when people of color are victimized by racism. They then develop ideas, beliefs, and actions about themselves and their racial group that support racism. So when something racist happens to them, the question becomes, what's wrong with me? Versus looking at that instance as an example of systemic racism. This happens because systems are in place that actively discourage and undermine the power of people and communities of color. The process is unconscious, meaning that we may know that feeling of hurt by racist actions, but there are deeper negative beliefs that can potentially develop. Internalized racism can limit people of color's beliefs in themselves and result in feelings of self-hatred because of the color of their skin. For white people, internalized racial superiority is also something that's happening under the surface. It goes beyond those direct statements or thoughts about racism. It's a process where white people develop values, beliefs, and actions that support the idea that white people and white culture are better than other racial groups. It also captures the idea of colorblind attitudes, or the belief that race just doesn't matter. While it's true that all people do deserve respect, by denying race and denying a person's race, we're also denying the very real realities of racism. These concepts are used to highlight the deep structural realities of our society and racial oppression in the past and present. So the work to combat internalized racism and internalized superiority fall on changing our systems. It lies in creating communities and educational environments free from racial bias and discrimination. However, the reality is that as a society, we are not there yet. Children are exposed to racism on a daily basis, and racism is trauma. So when kids are exposed to ongoing trauma, it's important that we also work to heal and help these kids cope with the experiences that they're facing. One important means of this is telling your story and reading stories about others. For families of color, it's important to talk to your kids and tell stories about the challenges their families face, your child's parents, aunts and uncles, grandparents, great-grandparents, and others. not only about the challenges, but also ones they've overcome. Passing down your narrative and the narrative of your own families reminds kids of their generational resistance and resilience. You can also use books and stories that reflect diversity in your home and lift up stories of resistance and their own racial identity. Check out the library on the House of 17 page. We've added some new books, such as Child of the Civil Rights Movement, which is pictured here. And in the links, you can have those books read to your child out loud on YouTube. We also have a list of lots of other different books for children and adults in that section of our page. Much like with kids of color, reading books is important for white parents too. The same list of books on our House 17 page applies to white families that directly talk about the history of and current racial injustices in our society. It opens the door for talking more about these topics. Also, having books with characters from diverse backgrounds and cultures helps keep kids see and learn about the diversity that's reflected in their own world. Civic engagement. As I mentioned, racism is trauma. It is trauma that shows up at the individual, interpersonal, and institutional level. Racism is collective trauma, so it requires civic action and collective healing. Civic action also allows kids a sense of agency or control. By participating in civic engagement, they aren't only learning more about their culture, participating in systems that dismantle racism, but also gain that sense of agency and control, which helps combat the feelings that build up over experiences and time with continued racism. Getting involved in places like the Gandhi Institute in Rochester. The Gandhi Institute is connected to School 17 and has workshops, clubs, classes, and interactive activities that help kids feel supported and connected. The Urban League of Rochester is just another organization that you can turn to that help youth get involved in civic engagement. This is important for white students and for our students of color. Even though you have these conversations, they're likely to be frustrating for you and your kids at times. The frustration of why are we still fighting this and why does it keep happening? One activity that you might try doing with your kids is taking some string and having your kid wind and tie it around themselves. After they're all tied up, then talk about how racism and oppression are kind of like that string. They build up over a long period of time. It's tangled and it's layered. So talk with your kids about how it will take time to untangle this string. Even if you get one knot out, there's still going to be more. So it's something that we have to keep working at. For all parents, your own healing is really important. As adults, the collective trauma of racism continues to shape our lives. Books, podcasts, and movies can help in our own education to counter internalized racism or internalized superiority. Also, sharing your narrative and getting involved in civic engagement yourself are ways that are going to contribute to your own healing. For white parents, it's really important to do this work yourself and set a good example. If you hear someone saying something that's racist, speak up. Your kids look up to you more than they may let on at times. And having an example of an anti-racist white adult is going to allow them to follow in your lead. You can also model making mistakes. Again, racism is deeply embedded in our society at the individual, interpersonal, and institutional level. At some point or another, you or your child is going to make a mistake, say something wrong, or get called out for something they did that's racist. It's okay. Maya Angelou once wrote, "You can't do better if you don't know better. But when you know better, do better." This is another reason why it's important to keep your own learning happening. Check out House 17 for a full list of resources for adults that's posted in the parent section. In addition to some of the new resources that have been added for this week, We also added a comment, question, or concern section on the House 17 homepage. By clicking on that link, you can reach out, get more support, or give us suggestions on what you want to hear more about. Thanks for watching today's video, and check back in again soon.